Breaking news on that missing airplane. The Greek defence minister says a body part, 2 seats and a suitcase have been spotted in the search for the EgyptAir plane. It was citing Egyptian authorities. Earlier, the Egyptian army said it had found debris from the missing EgyptAir plane to the north of Alexandria. 66 people were on board that aircraft, with relatives still waiting to find out what happened to their loved ones.
لا تجبني وتبونا باللي احنا فيه والنبي احنا فيه ولا فيه ولد ضامن الكيس ظابط عطيه
Well, as the search carries on, more details are emerging about the passengers of the doomed flight. Let's cross live now to RT's Anastasia Churkina to get more on the story. There you are, Anastasia. What do we know so far about those who were on that EgyptAir plane?
Well, Dan, now that the sort of initial shock of this incident has started to turn into a real investigation on the ground, we're also finally beginning to get details about the people who were on this flight. And certainly this makes everything so much more heartbreaking, learning more and more details about the specific people who were on this doomed flight. We know, for example, that one out of the 15 French citizens who was on this airplane MS-804 bound to Cairo was a man called Pascal Hess, who actually his friends and relatives have told stories about how he had lost his passport and was not sleeping for days, worried that he would not find his passport and thus miss his vacation. Then the passport magically appeared and he ended up going on this, what he thought would be a 10-day vacation on the Red Sea, which it had not turned out to be, obviously. Also, we've been hearing one of the employees at Charles de Gaulle Airport, a French woman, has been saying that she's in complete devastation and shock because, as she recounts, she was trying to get a family with 5 children who were late for this flight to try to get it on time to the right terminal. She does not know whether or not they ended up making it there, but she's been talking to the press saying she's just completely shocked and is waiting to find out that hopefully they were late for this flight. We do know, of course, that it's been reported that 2 children and 1 baby were, in fact, on this airplane. Now, we also know that another person who was on the plane was a Canadian mother of 3. She has 3 sons, aged 11 to 13, and she was visiting family in Paris and was returning to Cairo, where she lived. And also an Australian British geologist, Richard Osman, a man who had just 2 weeks ago, his 2nd daughter was born, and he was recounted by friends and people who knew him as being very happy about that having occurred in his life.
Some really tragic stories about the passengers on that doomed flight. All thoughts at the moment, of course, with the families and friends of those who've been lost in that tragic crash. RT's Anastasia Churkina there live from Paris, bringing us the updates on that story. Well, the captain of EgyptAir Flight was 37-year-old Mohammed Saeed Ali Shuka. He was an experienced aviator. He had been promoted to pilot in command just days before the crash. Mohammed Mahmoud Assem was his co-pilot and reportedly dreamt of flying planes as a young boy. One of the air hostesses was 27-year-old Sama Aziz Eldin, and cabin manager Mervat Zakaria was a former TV actress. She'd been promoted just a month prior to the crash. Well, the search operation is still ongoing, with Egypt, Greece, Turkey and France taking part. RT's Peter Oliver is in Cairo monitoring the latest on the missing plane.
The Egyptian military have confirmed that 290 kilometers to the north of the city of Alexandria that they have found wreckage and debris from flight MS-804. This backs up reports coming from the Greek Ministry of Defence, who have also said that they found debris, baggage, as well as bodies. So it does seem that they're starting to be able to find and locate, zero in on where this aircraft went down exactly in the Mediterranean. Now the task is going to be of retrieving this wreckage debris and, of course, those bodies and getting them to Egypt. Now, the investigation will continue, will begin once that is underway. It's an investigation that's going to be headed by the Egyptian side, but also along with the French, the British and the manufacturer of the aircraft, Airbus. All will be involved in this investigation to try and find out what exactly caused this plane to come down in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, we heard from the Egyptian government official in charge of air transportation. He said that as it stood at the moment, it was unlikely that it was a technical fault that had caused this plane to come down, and suggested that perhaps terrorism could be the most likely scenario.
The crew had no time to make a distress call. Everything happened too fast. If there had been a technical fault, the crew would have time to report it. That's why an act of terrorism is the most likely explanation. There are many possibilities, and we will only know for sure after an inquiry is conducted. It's possible that a bomb explosion damaged the flight control system.
Well, all focus is now on recovering the debris and bodies of this flight. We've heard from both EgyptAir, the carrier, and from the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who've expressed their condolences to the family members and loved ones of those who were on board. Well, I'm here outside of one of the EgyptAir office buildings at Cairo International Airport. It had been set up as a crisis centre for relatives of those on board the plane. Yesterday, though, we saw many of those leaving here quite angry at what they saw as a lack of information being sent their way.
The plane disappeared from radar en route from Paris to Cairo early on Thursday. It was about 25 minutes away from its final destination. Here's a reconstruction of the plane's route.
EgyptAir Flight 804 took off from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport late on Wednesday evening, heading for Cairo with 56 passengers and 10 crew members on board. 2 hours and 15 minutes later, the plane entered Greek airspace according to schedule. And at 23:38 GMT, air traffic controllers in Greece communicated with the pilots, who were apparently in good spirits. That turned out to be the last that was heard of the crew. Less than an hour later, they failed to respond to repeated contact requests. And just after entering Egyptian airspace, the plane disappeared from radar screens.
Well, the disappearance of the EgyptAir plane has raised some concerns over safety at Charles de Gaulle Airport, with many aviation experts saying security loopholes there may have played a role. Earlier, Rory Souchet discussed the issue with William Whiteman.
When it comes to security at Charles de Gaulle in Paris, it's typically rumoured for being very strict and safe.
That is generally the consensus across Europe. However, we spoke to some experts who said that actually they have some serious complaints when it comes to the level of security across Europe.
The aircraft originated from Charles de Gaulle Airport in the heart of Europe. This raises security questions and concerns about security actually at Charles de Gaulle. I don't think that Charles de Gaulle Airport is more secure than Cairo International Airport, where the aircraft initially originated from.
There's an insider threat in the industry, as there is in most industries. You've got to be very careful about the people that are employed in sensitive positions, and thorough background checking needs to be done. Unfortunately, that has not been done as well as it could have been over the years. And it greatly concerns me as I travel around and look at airports and people that sometimes you're not seeing much more than cosmetic security.
Some 57 airport employees with advanced security clearance were actually found to be on a government intelligence list as potential Islamic extremists. Another one which we found was from Berlin, and there was an individual who was employed at both of Berlin's main airports for a total of 10 months after the government became aware of the fact that he had links to Islamic extremist individuals who he had regular meetings with. We've seen a number of complaints from people who've used Charles de Gaulle Airport who felt that the security there wasn't quite up to scratch.
At least 100 people were standing or sitting on the floor at the gate area due to 2 major flights leaving from the same gate, each delayed by hours. Agents were standing around drinking coffee and talking on cell phones, ignoring confused passengers.
Worst airport I've experienced. The airport could not handle the amount of passengers.
They do not track bags through this airport because they do not scan baggage. It's nearly impossible to know when your baggage will arrive.
The passport control was hopelessly inadequate for the 400-plus passengers who arrived on Emirates A380. There was one customs officer to process those with EU passports and one for the rest.
William, it was last November when a Russian jet was brought down by terrorism in the same Sinai region, and people then complained about the lack of proper airport security in Egypt. But now we're seeing complaints over airport security in Paris.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, obviously, the complaints which we were seeing made about Sharm el-Sheikh airport in Egypt were obviously far more concerning. There was a much larger security problem there. However, there are some similar complaints, and these are specifically to do with security staffing, the level of staffing, and then also poor luggage checks when it comes to checking what could potentially be inside them. But yeah, this is obviously something which is a concern to people who are using not just Charles de Gaulle Airport, but then other airports across Europe for these potential dangers.
Well, there are also reports that dozens of airport employees could, in principle, have had access to the EgyptAir aircraft. That's according to local media, citing a source close to the investigation. We're closely following all the latest developments concerning the missing EgyptAir plane. Well, let's have a quick recap of what is known so far. 56 passengers and 10 crew members were on board that Airbus. It was flying from Paris to Cairo when it disappeared from radar contact in Egyptian airspace. The Egyptian military says it has spotted debris from the plane and the personal belongings of the passengers to the north of Alexandria. That information was also confirmed by EgyptAir. The cause of the tragedy remains unclear so far, but the Egyptian civil aviation minister has said terrorism is a more likely explanation than a technical failure.